Okay, wonderful. Thank you all so much for being here. Really appreciate it. We have a busy night for those of us that are doing both the seminar and the National Health Service Corps presentation after this on a different Zoom link. So if you can join us, please do so. And we're happy to pass along that Zoom link if you need it. But our first presentation, we have Maddie Herman from the Voice Center at Montana State University. And I think a couple of her advocates as well. So Maddie, I'll turn it over to you for introductions of you and your team, and just let us know if you need anything.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'm going to see if I can talk and multitask at the same time here. So my name is Maddie Herman. Just like you said, I work at the Voice Center. I'm one of our professional staff. I am the education specialist here. And just to confirm, you can see this slide that says the Voice Center on it?
We can.
Perfect. Okay, I accomplished some multitasking today. So before I jump into the main content of what we're doing today, I want to make sure that my colleagues with me are able to introduce themselves. So I will toss it over to Ian real quick to introduce himself.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Great. I hear you.
Okay, I'm Ian. I'm on the student staff at the Voice Center, and I'm going to be helping Maddie present today.
And then, are you able to pop on, Micah? Have you figured out how to do that piece? Perfect.
I'm silent advocating. I'm at the beach, and if you need anybody to talk to through personal message or a breakout video.
Yeah. Did everybody hear Micah? I'm not so sure if that one went through. I will repeat what she said. So Micah is one of our student volunteers, and she's acting as our silent advocate today. So we acknowledge that coming in as the Voice Center and the work we do, that we might already be connecting with people who are survivors of interpersonal violence, and they might need somebody to talk to. And sometimes the content we're bringing up can just be really heavy for people. So the role for Micah, who you can't see on my screen, but she's here, is if you need somebody to talk to in the moment, you are welcome to chat with her via the Zoom messaging, the private messaging, or if you would prefer, actually what you can see on the screen is our 24/7 crisis line number, and you can text that number. And so she's ready to go. If you feel like that's a better resource for you guys to access right now, if you feel funky using Zoom to chat about some personal things, you are welcome to text that 406-994-7069 number during this presentation, and it'll be Micah just supporting you in whatever it is that you need to talk about and what you're going through. If you do have questions directly for me though, please throw those in the chat so I can see them coming in. But on that note, I'll just kind of talk about what the Voice Center is and what we do before we really jump into the meat of today, which is I really want to talk to you all about trauma-informed care. And what does that mean for the Voice Center? Or what does that mean for you all in your careers? What does that mean for you all as students? But I actually think maybe Ian was going to talk about this stuff first. So perfect. I will take a pause and let him introduce everything.
Okay, hi. So the Voice Center is an office at MSU. We're in the sub on the 3rd floor, sub 370, as it says on this slide. And what we do is support survivors of interpersonal violence. So that can be something like stalking, relationship violence, or sexual assault is kind of the main ones, but there's a few other things that fall under that category. And of the services we provide, we kind of help bridge people to other resources. And then we also, could you go back a slide real quick, Maddie? We also have a 24/7 confidential support line. So that's like all the time when at least when the semester is running. During the summer or breaks, the office is still open, but it has shortened hours.
Well, actually, so our crisis line number 24/7, 365, still fully functional, still fully rolling. And you'll be able to get access to us throughout the summer. And we will be like summer hours will look like 8 to 5, like somebody will be in the office. I know that's a little bit of a shift than normal, but just so you all know, we are here throughout the summer. Office is still open.
Okay. Yeah, so that's a good positive change. But that's the number right there on the front of the slide. So there's always going to be somebody there to talk to you 24/7. Okay, next slide. Some of the services we provide more specifically is crisis support for survivors of interpersonal violence. And then we also provide support for people we call secondary survivors. So people that are impacted by interpersonal violence, like families and friends that didn't directly experience that violence. Often, a lot of times, it's those people that come in to the Voice Center and kind of get some resources to bring back to the survivor themselves. We also provide advocacy for survivors when they come in. We work off a model called the empowerment model, which is the idea that any of these crimes of interpersonal violence are crimes of power and control. And so they're taking the power away from the survivor. And what we're trying to do is give that back to them. So we're giving them an opportunity to make their own decisions and not telling them what to do, just providing them with options so that they can make those decisions for themselves and help heal. And a lot of what we do in our advocacy is bridging people to other services. A lot of that's things like the Office of Institutional Equity, our OIE office, or other services in town like Haven and the Help Center. Finally, we do what we're doing today. We do a lot of education, which is our form of primary prevention. And that's teaching people about consent, healthy relationships, trauma-informed care like today. And then sometimes we talk about bystander intervention training, red flags, relationship red flags, that sort of thing, just recognition stuff. But today we're going to focus on that trauma-informed care. One of the best resources that we have for survivors runs through the Students Against Sexual Assault Club on campus, which is associated with the Voice Center. And that's called the Survivor Fund. And that's just a pool of money that basically allocates funds to survivors for whatever they say they need. I mean, they have to describe what they need and how much it might cost, or we can figure out how much something might cost for them. But it just kind of helps give them like a way to get back on their feet or recover a little more quickly. I'm actually on the board for that. And the way it works is a request gets sent in and then just some money, or the board receives a request for like a certain amount of money and a certain thing. And then just as a board, we kind of have a big text conversation and we approve it or don't, or talk about it. And then it gets sent back to the Voice Center and the money gets given to the survivor if we approve. The last piece I want to add on that is just some examples of what we use that money for. A really common one is often like sheets or clothes will get taken away by the hospital or by police for like forensic evidence after a sexual assault. And we can just help replace those kind of things there. It's not that expensive. It makes a really big difference for the survivor. It kind of helps them recover more quickly. So that's like a really good example. We can go to the next, yeah. One event I just want to talk about that we have coming up is called the Bozeman Monologues. It's going to be a really cool event. We're going to have just people telling firsthand stories of just different like interesting life experiences they had. Some of them will be sexual assault and related to trauma. Some of them will be like kind of people talking about how they healed. I think we're going to have some burlesque dancers just kind of doing some empowerment, kind of showing how they healed through dance, and sort of ending it with a positive note. So I think it'll be a really cool event. We got 9 different speakers and performers for about 10 minutes a piece. And that'll be next Thursday. Doors open at 6 and that'll be at the Emerson. Okay, so to start some of the content for today, we just want to go over a few myths with you guys. If you could all access the chat as I go through some of these, I'd just like to see some responses in the chat of like what you think. So the first myth we're going to go over is very healthcare related. It's if a patient is in an abusive relationship, you should tell them to leave immediately. What do we think? Is that a myth?
Is that true or false? Myth or reality?
true or
Throw
false.
true or false in the chat.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of correct answers. That's right. That's definitely a myth. And there's some really core reasons for this. The main one is it's really dangerous. A lot of research shows that the most dangerous time in abusive relationships is right when people are going to leave. The 2 weeks following, just before, specifically those 2 weeks after, but also that just any time around it is really dangerous. And there's a million different reasons why people might not leave, safety being one of them, like I just mentioned, but also like often there's really complex emotions in those kind of relationships. And so the best thing to do is really to support people, put them in an empowerment position and let them make their own decision to leave if they decide they want to leave, and help like give them a safe place, give them a safe, like some good resources, rather than like suggesting that they leave really strongly or pushing them to leave. And that can go through looping in professionals as well. Okay, now we're just going to go over a few statements that we're going to talk about whether they're victim blaming or not. So we're going to start with the first one, and that's, we've talked about this before, you shouldn't have been out that late. So could you respond in the chat again? Yeah, exactly. That's definitely victim blaming. Any ideas why? You can also throw that in the chat. Or a specific language that you think is really victim blaming. Yeah, I'm seeing gaslighting in there. I mean, I think this is pretty classic victim blaming in the sense of like, it's putting the blame on the survivor and not the person that caused the crime. There's no focus on the perpetrator in this statement. It's all focused on the survivor and how they could have prevented the crime. Let's see. Yeah, exactly. I'm seeing a lot of that same stuff in the chat. What about this next one? She must have been a really big woman and stronger than you. What do we think about that?
Do we feel like, yeah, is this one victim blaming? Is this one helpful? Is this one hurtful? Weird thing to say. I appreciate that. Not
Yeah.
helpful. Minimizing. Thank you. I really appreciate that one. And just so you know, I actually got this second one from, like, that's a direct quote from a survivor as said by a medical professional to them.
Can I have a clarification here?
Yes.
She must have been a really big woman and stronger than you. That means she, I'm not understanding what, I mean, because she's stronger, she got away, or what is it? But she did not get away if she's.
So to provide some clarification and more context to this one, this was a male survivor telling their physician that they felt like they were in an abusive relationship, that they felt like things were not okay. And the physician's response was, wow, she must have been like a really big woman and stronger than you, as if that's the only way that somebody could be in an abusive relationship when they're a man and their partner's a woman. Yeah, thank you for that clarification. Really great question.
Yeah, I think this is a really powerful one because like a really powerful example, because it's so, it hits at so many different things. It hits at a lot of the male stigma we see. I feel like that's something I see all the time, of like male survivors are stigmatized because it's just assumed that survivors are going to be female, or that male survivors like are strong. And so I mean, that ties all the way into like a lot of the stereotypes of men being like stronger and more powerful, I guess. But
I guess
Um,
by default, I was thinking that.
yeah, so it really ties into a lot of those ideas. And like Maddie said, I think probably most importantly, it implies that the only type of abuse is physical, or that the primary type of abuse is physical. And there's a lot of other ways that abusive relationships can look. Often they can be really emotionally abusive. They can be a lot of threats, a lot of forcing. One I see a lot is like using self-harm threats or suicide threats to force the survivor to do something. And I mean, that doesn't have anything to do with size. That's just like, that's basically emotional manipulation. Okay. What about this third one? Why did you let him into the house?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, that one's pretty straight up. I mean, somebody letting the perpetrator into the house doesn't have, like, letting them into the house is not letting them assault them. Like, those are two completely separate things. And so I mean, it kind of ties back into that like classic, they were asking for it. I mean, they're never asking for it. Nobody's ever asking for it.
Yeah, something I always like to bring up with this one is you're allowed to let people into your house and not expect to be harmed by them.
Yeah.
A lot of times what we're seeing when interpersonal violence is happening is that it's people you trust. It's people that you have a relationship with. And so sometimes it could be the scenario of, well, I trusted this person. I had no idea that this was going to happen. Or even on the other end of the spectrum, let's say there has been a lot of history there. What if that was the safest option in that moment? What if letting them into the house felt like the best case scenario for navigating that situation? And so again, it's all of these are really steeped in victim blaming and a lot of things that happen in society. And it's just, it takes light off of the real issue when we're only focusing on what survivors are doing or not doing. That's not actually helping us talk about how to prevent violence and how to stop individuals from causing harm.
Exactly. Getting to this fourth one, if you were really raped, you would remember it really well. That's just basic survival instinct.
How do we feel about, boom, wonderful. That's
Yes.
just not how trauma is processed. And I imagined this group of people would understand that very clearly. I appreciate that.
I love that comment. That's exactly right.
Yep.
I mean, trauma is just not processed that way. People don't remember everything. Sometimes they remember really vividly. Sometimes it's not clear because their brain shut down, which is like a really normal response to trauma. I mean, that one really ties into those ideas. And then finally, what about haven't you hooked up with them before? What do we think about that one? Yeah, there's some
Yep.
other good answers.
I loved the so question mark.
Yeah.
Felt
Yeah.
that one. Yep.
Those are some great answers. I mean, that's exactly right. Like, consent is an ongoing thing. And so consent one time doesn't mean consent every time. And I think this just really ties into that idea.
Yeah. Thank you all for sharing all of your insight and thoughts on all of this. I really appreciate this. I'll have the chat open. And so I'll try to multitask again. So far, I've been doing pretty good with that. And so feel free to even unmute yourself and talk. I know we have just a short amount of time with each other, but I want this to be as informative and engaging as helpful as possible. So if there's any way to go with this and you have questions, like I'm ready to pivot if needed is essentially what I'm talking about. But just so you all know, like, as we've talked about, we really want to jump into trauma-informed care. And I really want to break down what that looks like. Like when I say that, what does that mean in our day-to-day actions? What does that mean in how we hold ourselves as human beings, as well as for you all moving into the careers that you'll ultimately have? Big picture, trauma-informed care for me is getting at this idea of moving away from this idea of what's wrong with you and instead moving into this more curious mindset of like, what happened to you? And as based on some of your responses to these questions, I feel like you guys already have a trauma informed lens of like understanding what trauma does to the mind and to the body and how that might change somebody's behaviors, and why somebody walking through your door into your office for an appointment might be acting a certain way, might say certain things that maybe feel really intense, or you just don't understand these behaviors. Again, it's moving away from this identity, like something's wrong with you to your core, which completely changes how we engage with somebody. If we think that's like inherent to that individual, that's really unchangeable. So then that completely changes how we interact with humans, how we interact with patients. Like our interpretation of what's going on guides our intervention with that person. So then if we change into the lens and mindset of like, what happened to you, that's workable, because you can start understanding. It builds empathy, first of all, and it also helps you understand this is how we can move forward, because behaviors can change, people's mindsets and the way they're working through life and their access to resources and connecting them to other resources. All of that is so much more accessible when we come through the lens of like, what happened to you? You can work with that. You can get curious, rather than kind of like what's wrong with you gets us to point A and that's it. Everything just stops from there. To also just kind of talk about what else does it mean to be trauma informed. It's really having a deep understanding of how trauma impacts human beings, how violence impacts our minds and our bodies, and really having that clear understanding that even though we talk about mind and body, even though I've separated it there on this slide, really having this deep understanding that it's more like mind body. We are more, our minds and bodies are more connected to being one solid organism than they are being completely isolated entities. And then for you all, knowing that maybe just being able to recognize what are some signs of trauma. So of course, if people are walking into your office, or if you're just supporting friends, starting to recognize like, okay, some things are shifting for this individual, or I have a whole list that we'll kind of go through eventually, and just keeping those in your back pocket. So if you're seeing these signs in patients, if you're working with children, like you can start to understand maybe something else is going on here. Maybe it's not just behavioral issues in the classroom because they're a bad kid. Maybe we need to get curious and think about what else is going on. I think what's really important to know is that knowing one person with trauma is knowing one person with trauma. We all respond to trauma differently. Our minds and bodies are different. We're going to be different compared to other people. And we see this even in siblings. They experience the exact same thing, and they are experiencing that trauma differently. They're responding to it differently. They need different interventions because the impact of trauma has impacted them differently. Especially for you all, I always like to emphasize this idea of multidisciplinary collaboration, because trauma can be so invasive that it might not be sufficient to just focus on this one piece of the human. It might be, maybe you are their nurse practitioner, or you're their physician, or you're seeing them in this very medical lens, making sure you're also looping in, obviously, family, if that's a helpful resource, and especially if they're children. But maybe it's also being able to collaborate and get them connected to other resources that can help meet some needs for them, whether that's basic needs. So they're struggling with affordable housing, they're struggling with affording food, maybe they live in a food desert. Like, this multidisciplinary collaboration is really trying to broaden how we understand healing, because it's not just, here, take this one pill and you're gonna be fine forever. It's like, we are complex human beings with very complex neurological systems. So knowing that if we can loop in more providers and everybody's on the same page about what's going on and ways to get people connected and what healing can look like, that's only gonna help people. And as best as we can, really coming from that empowerment model. And I know Ian already talked about this, but really allowing survivors to lead and steer their medical decisions, honestly. And so, yes, you guys are going to be experts in very specific things, and you're going to have so much medical knowledge, or you're going to have such a wealth of knowledge in very specific areas, and still allowing the people who show up in front of you to make their own decisions at the end of the day. Even when it's really hard, when it's like, oh man, if they just did XYZ, we can almost see it clearly because we've been here before, we've supported people before, and we can almost see it like, oh, if they just did this and this, boom, I know that would help. But we can't force that on people. They are actually the experts of their own lives. They know best what's going to make the most sense for them and what's going to make the most sense for them right then and there. I've had my own personal interactions with medical professionals where all of a sudden I had to remind myself that the empowerment model is real and that I get to make my own medical decisions. No provider, no matter their level of expertise, gets to force me to take medications and change my whole medical history, or not history, but like what I need to do moving forward. So even that, like even outside of trauma, I think a lot of these things are just helpful for anybody showing up to your door. And as we've kind of really emphasized throughout this, healing is not one size fits all. So just because you've seen and supported somebody who's experienced sexual assault and them doing yoga really helped them heal doesn't mean now yoga is going to help every single person who's ever experienced sexual assault. It does make our jobs a little bit harder because we do have to take in all this information. We have to be super mindful and we have to be curious. And sometimes it is just trying this, making our best decisions, making our best guess, best informed decision that we can. At the heart of healing from trauma, though, is this idea of body regulation and human connection. And we'll really jump into that stuff a little bit later. You guys might know a lot of this information already, but feel free to ask questions or even teach me some things if you're interested in that. But what's so important to understand about trauma and toxic stress is that it changes us on a very deep level. So the way our brain is wired will change, the way we take in information from our environment changes. And that's because our body is in survival mode. We're actively seeking information to keep us safe. We're not thinking necessarily with our logical brain all the time. Our brain is like, we're not safe. And so our priority is something else. And that rewires our brain and what we're sensitive to and how we wire memories and all this stuff. It also changes some of the physical stuff going on in our body. So our immune system and especially our GI system are impacted relatively quickly when trauma happens. Yes, spot on, increased risk for development of an eating disorder. That's huge, the way our bodies respond when something has happened. And I think the GI system, all of us could probably just understand this on a less intense level of just like, when we're stressed out just because we're working too much or because we have so many projects due or school is just overwhelming, at least for me, one of the first things to go out is my stomach. I have stomach aches all the time. I feel like my eating habits change significantly. Like every part of my GI system is impacted by stress. And so imagine when it reaches toxic stress, imagine when it's trauma and violence and what that could do to a GI system. And what I find really interesting about the right side of the screen is that there is this increased risk for all of these things. And initially when research was coming out, people responded with like, well, of course, if somebody's experienced trauma and violence, they're just not coping with it in a healthy way. So of course, they're going to have an increased risk for heart disease and lung disease because they're eating poorly and they're smoking a lot and they're just engaging in really high risk behaviors. What's fascinating though, is that they controlled for all of those behavioral choices essentially. And still, people who experienced especially childhood trauma were at a higher risk for experiencing these things. And the best knowledge we have so far is because stress at that intensity for that long is not good for our body. We're really good at small doses of stress as human beings. Maybe we all know that from, maybe we're procrastinators. And so we like that boost of adrenaline and cortisol because then we just pump out that 10-page paper so quickly because we had that extra dose of stuff going through us. That's healthy stress. That is an amount of stress that we can understand. However, when our body's constantly flooded with cortisol and adrenaline and our brains are constantly hyperactive and overactive like that, it's not good for us. That's when we can start to see some degradation. And I do see that question. I will get that information to you all. I actually have a huge document where I'm compiling all the research that I use. So I will get that to most likely Emma, because I have her direct contact information. And so I'll make sure that gets to you all.
I just want to add like a couple medical bits to that last slide, and actually it ties into this second one too. Just how, like, you guys know this, of course, but stress, chronic stress puts you into your sympathetic nervous system, and that's going to pull a lot of blood flow and energy away from your gastrointestinal system and your immune system, and it's going to cause a lot of these reactions. And it also ties into, like, you have your enteric nervous system in your gut, and that's gonna, like, effects to your nervous system up here are gonna affect your nervous system in your gut as well, because it's so vast and significant.
Yeah, this I know off the top of my head, maybe not necessarily tied to this, because I do know some of the other resources I can send to Emma, but if you guys ever have the opportunity to read The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. Yes, okay, sorry, I was about to add other names to it, but it's Bessel van der Kolk. A lot, he has spent decades researching PTSD, so high intensity stress, a lot of for like survivors from war, but then also eventually it turned into understanding childhood trauma and the impacts of just severe stress on anybody in the community. Perfect. I'm so glad that you all have read it. That very intense, but so informative. I won't go over every single one of these, but I do just think it's important to know that these are some of the things you can be looking out for if you're trying to get curious about, is there something else going on for this patient or this human being in front of me that's talking to me and engaging. What's really important to know is that if you guys haven't recognized already, a lot of these bullet points have a lot of similarities to maybe other physical medical diagnoses, maybe a lot of similarities to mental health diagnoses. So again, you can't just like look at this and be like, oh, because you have chronic headaches, that means you've experienced trauma. Let's talk about it. It's about getting curious. It's about trying to ask questions. And it's also trying to assess, is this a change for this individual? So especially if you are able to have some sort of baseline already, baseline knowledge about this individual and how they're functioning and what life looks like for them already, then seeing that they are experiencing fatigue and exhaustion now, or maybe these chronic headaches are coming up, stuff like that. It's just trying to understand, is this different for them? Because for me, like, I experience headaches. I've experienced headaches my whole life. And so that's not necessarily a change for me. That's not necessarily something that needs to be cued in on. But I know when I can start checking in with myself, maybe my stress is getting too high. Again, it's GI pain and back pain. That stuff is like some of the first things to kick in for me. So even assessing for yourself, because a part of what we talk about today about trauma-informed care is that taking care of yourself is critical. Addressing secondary trauma is so important, because in order for us all to continue to do work, do it sustainably and do it for the long haul, so continuing to be able to do this for the rest of our careers, we have to make sure we're taking care of our own bodies and our own minds. But I'll jump into that a little bit later. What we want to hear from you all, and this is where we'll have a little bit of a breakout session. I know Emma's going to work on throwing you guys into groups.
Hey, Elise and Olive, can you put these letters away? These letters that you made at school away?
Okay, I don't.
Yes, don't.
That in. Okay, perfect. I was like, I don't think they're talking to me, but just to throw it to you all, what I'd love to hear and have you guys talk with each other and then kind of come back to the group to share a little bit is all this stuff that we've already talked about. And all the stuff that you guys already know is like, how could this apply to your role as medical professionals? Like being trauma informed, having this intimate understanding, shifting away from what's wrong with you to what happened to you. How could this apply to your role as medical professionals? So giving you, perfect. That should work just fine. Thank you so much, Christina. And take like 2-ish minutes to kind of talk amongst yourselves, and then we'll do a quick pop back here and kind of hear what your guys' thoughts were. You have no way of knowing if the breakout sessions are happening.
I opened them and
Okay.
it looks like a lot of people are moving in.
Okay,
so,
perfect. Cool.
yeah, we can close them in a couple minutes.
Beautiful. Oh, it was like, who's this person? It's you.
Okay, I'm gonna bring them back.
Beautiful.
Thanks, Emma.
I could be wrong.
No, this slide definitely would have helped me out a bit, right? We need to get my Pedro flask with the straw back into working.
Oh my God.
Oh, the garbage? Oh, no, good.
I scared somebody away with my crash. There were 10.
Oh, God.
Okay, everyone's gonna be back in like 1 second. They should all be back now. So
Okay, perfect. Before we jump into the rest, is anybody either want to quick unmute themselves? Like, what were some big takeaways from those conversations, or throw it in the chat? I'd just be curious to hear how you guys feel this applies to your work as future medical professionals.
Our group emphasized the point that we should meet people where they're at, not where we want them to be.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's huge. That was literally at my old job, a service that we would provide was literally called Meet Me Where I Am. And so I think that is a beautiful, beautiful thing. Holistic approach to care, love it. I think that's huge. Interdisciplinary work is needed, absolutely. Keep throwing ideas in the chat. If you really want to share more, you're welcome to, but I know just for the sake of time, and I know myself, I talk too much, I'm going to pass it off to Ian to kind of do this next piece.
Yeah. So just to talk about some protective factors from trauma for people in general, some of these are a little more oriented at younger people, or things that happen to people when they're younger. But the number one predictor, and this comes from that Body Keeps the Score book, the number one predictor, and like main factor of whether somebody experiences trauma in childhood or not and has to deal with trauma throughout their life is whether they have a single stable trusted adult while they're growing up. So even 1 versus 0 is like the biggest change. You know, if they have 2, I mean, it makes it a little somewhat better. And if they have like a totally safe life, that makes it a lot better too. But having that one place they can go, that it can be a teacher that they like just can go for like an hour a few times a week and feel safe. Or it could be a parent if they're lucky. Sometimes it's a sibling, but it just needs to be one person. That's like the biggest correlation with whether somebody deals with trauma a lot in their life or not.
And also their ability to heal from trauma. So they have experienced trauma. Kind of some studies have shown, like comparing, like what has made the difference. Everybody has experienced XYZ trauma when they were a kid, kind of comparing them through their lifetime. What made the difference for people to feel like I'm healed and I'm in a better place? Kind of what they saw was they had just one person who cared, one person who showed up and was there for them. And so I find that really powerful for us as human beings, because we don't need a master's in social work to be able to help people. We can just be somebody who answers the phone sometimes and who lets them know we care about them, and we can bridge that gap a little bit. And then also just from a medical professional perspective, that opens so many doors of opportunities, because we have so many interactions with people that could make a difference in being that one person.
Yeah, even just being a safe, reliable medical professional like that can make a huge difference, especially if somebody's just undergone a trauma and you're like one of the first people they see after that. I mean, just being stable, reliable, somebody they can trust is going to help so much with the healing of that. Individual strengths of the person make a big impact. Things like self-efficacy and their ability to pursue passions, resiliency, a lot of those individual strengths, and those actually really tie back to things like having a stable, trusted adult or a good like environment growing up. It allows people to develop those and feel stable enough to have good self-efficacy and be able to dream or pursue their passions. Social support is a big factor. Having reliable friends, even if they're not adults, just kind of support for somebody and feeling like they have a support system to go to talk about things, to help process things. Those are huge factors. The culture as a whole has a major impact, particularly at the community level. Having a anti-violence culture can help a lot, as opposed to a really violent culture. Like somebody's inner city, they deal with a lot of gang violence all the time. We're seeing a lot of school shootings right now. If somebody's in an area where they see a lot of shootings, those are really big factors about whether somebody can feel safe and heal from a trauma. Like if their neighborhood's fundamentally not safe or even hasn't been in the past, those are going to be big factors whether somebody can heal from trauma, and for obvious reasons. I mean, yeah. And then finally, just to tie into, I'm sure things you guys know a lot about, just social determinants of health, things like basic needs. Can somebody access food? Can they access water really well? Do they have a good shelter? This is like at the bottom of Maslow's triangle, like really basic needs stuff. Having access to healthcare. I mean, obviously, you guys are rural health, you know that access to healthcare is poor in rural areas than it is in other areas. That's like a major factor as well. Transportation, being able to get where they need to go, being able to access healthcare, being able to access.
Wait a minute, after this week.
Is that fish that you?
And then finally, things like just environmental, like is their water clean and safe? Do they have access to a place to take a shower? Do they have access to somewhere to exercise? I mean, that could be a big factor in processing trauma. A lot of those factors are major protective factors as well. So we just want you guys to kind of look, it's on the next slide, we have a connection quiz that just kind of give some perspective, I think. And it'll have just some questions about your own life. You don't have to share your answers, but we are going to ask you to just talk about some thoughts you have as soon as you fill that out.
Kind of just go through this, answer these for yourself. Take some time. We'll give you a minute or two. And then, like Ian said, we'll have another breakout session, but you do not need to share any of your answers. This is very interesting. I've never done this quiz virtually, so I have no idea how to know how long people need or if people are done. I will make another note to send a copy of this to Emma so that I can get you one of these. I'll give people a few more seconds. Yeah, of course. Send connection quiz. Okay. And then I know this is very interesting. It's kind of just taking like a mental note, looking at this, kind of answering for yourself. How would you rate your relationship or the strength of your relationship with parent, siblings, and then kind of answering for yourself, yes or no. Just
If
so you can
have-
see.
Hold on.
I'm gonna go to the next slide just so you can see what the think, pair, share is gonna be. How could these connections change someone's health outcomes or change someone's ability to navigate the trauma they've experienced and be successful essentially in a medical system? I'll go back. No, how do I go back? Figured it out. So essentially what that think, pair, share is getting at, what if somebody said no to all of these questions? What if one of your patients didn't have any of these systems or any of these support systems? So they said no to someone that they could go to for the holidays, no to someone being a co-signer on a lease, no to somebody who just checks in on them and cares, no to somebody who would help them get to medical appointments. So I'd love for a breakout session to happen for a few minutes to just talk about how could that change somebody's ability to follow through on like the medical plan that you create for them.
Yeah, just think about like back to that idea of like a single trusted adult is such a huge factor. I mean, if the answer to none of these, probably don't have a single trusted adult.
Maddie, just so you know, because we have a meeting with someone from HRSA after this, I'm gonna hop off a little early, and Mandy Hedstrom is like the other person in the office, so she'll be doing breakout rooms and stuff after that. So
Perfect. I
I'm gonna leave
think
it.
sounds great. And I do realize it's almost that time. And I know people have other things they're jumping to. So I'm going to do my best to get through these next 4 or 5 slides in 9 minutes.
Sounds good. I'm gonna close rooms because then they have a minute to come back.
Beautiful. Okay, perfect. So just real quick, throw in the chat, what were some of the things that you came up with? Yeah. I think that one bite at a time, I think I can think of a few different definitions of like what that could mean. And just for the sake of time, yes, beautiful. I'm gonna move forward, but I would love to keep seeing your guys' ideas. I know when I've done this with teachers before, they've really responded with like, learning's not the priority for them then. If their support system is that broken down, then like they're in survival mode, not learning mode. Or it's like without a support system, it can make it that much harder to just heal, to just move forward. Love it. So for this next slide, this is really specific into like your interaction with a patient in the moment. And honestly, I feel like a lot of these things I'm going to talk about on this slide and on the next slide, they feel pretty obvious. They feel like common sense. They feel like, oh yeah, I'm just going to be a human being interacting with another human being, and we're going to be great. But I think what's going to be so important is being very intentional with all of this, because especially when we're overworked, underpaid, understaffed, burning out, when we feel like we have 10 back-to-back appointments and we have 15 minutes with each patient, it can get really hard and complicated to start doing these things every single time. And some of these things are the first ones to go, but they make a huge difference. Literally introducing yourself and just saying like, this is who I am, that can make a difference. We've supported survivors who are like, I had no idea who was walking into the door. They just started talking to me about stuff. Like, it makes a difference when you explain your role and your name. Establish a way for the patient to stop or take a break. So if you're going to do a procedure, if you need to ask them a lot of questions, let them know. Again, they have some control and be like, hey, I just want you to know, this is what I have to do. This is what we're going to talk about. We're allowed to pause. We're allowed to take a break. We can circle back to this if needed. And then reassuring them that you'll listen, because something we've also supported a survivor through is that was established. They were told that they could say stop and that things would stop. And then that wasn't followed through on. The stop wasn't listened to. They kept going anyway. And also know that if you're listening to their needs, like, let them know, like, there's nothing to be afraid of. I'm not here to judge you. I'm not going to shame you or blame you for anything that's happened to you. And then what can be so important to understand is that communicate before touching a patient in any capacity. And I've actually supported a survivor going through a gynecological exam, and this provider was phenomenal. It was literally like, okay, I have to use this device. It's going to probably feel like this, and it's going to be cold. I now have to put my hand right here on your thigh. So I'm going to do that. Okay, actually, I need to adjust my hand so I can get a better angle, move it, like literally step by step. If there's going to be a change of touching, a change of anything, communicating that. Obviously, providing private accommodations is going to be really helpful if that's possible. Even just a curtain can make a difference. Even just angling yourself just right so that nobody else can see what's happening, that can make a difference. And when appropriate, allowing a support system in there to just hold their hand or be in the corner so that they know somebody is there for them. What this can also look like when we're just communicating with a patient who's experienced trauma, we already know what happens to the brain. We already know all of this information. So really just understanding that your communication style might need to be a little bit different. You might have to repeat stuff multiple times in one session, let alone over multiple sessions. Because again, we understand how memory is being encoded. We understand the impacts of trauma and stress. You might just need to ask your own questions differently so that they can actually understand what it is that you're trying to get at. Providing more details about procedures. So it's not just, okay, yeah, I'm inserting an IUD. That's all you need to know, right? It's like actually giving more information about what that looks like, where it's going, why it's there, like, and it's going to take 5 minutes or it's going to take this long, like just providing more details. That again, I think when we are in the job long enough, sometimes we just know the information so well that we forget not everybody else knows that information so well. And then also when burnout is happening, a lot of things can just get easily interrupted. I think something that can be so huge is just normalizing somebody's response to trauma. Because again, so many survivors will come in saying, is this like, my body's doing XYZ, or every time I smell this thing, I go into a panic attack. Like, and they feel weird and they feel like they're crazy. They feel like they're losing their minds. And if we can just normalize, like, you went through something traumatic. This is your brain and body trying to survive that, trying to work through that. That is a completely normal reaction. And that's all it takes, just normalizing people's responses to trauma. I love that not making big reactions, no reactions to patients is key. I kind of tie that into that last one of mirroring. So it's this fine balance of like, if a patient is making jokes, it's not just being like weirded out by it, because we do know that making jokes can be a trauma response. It's being okay with that. Maybe you're not going to like cackle and laugh as loud as possible at all their jokes, but you're going to kind of be there with them, like maybe smile a little. So it's like, again, you're not going to have that extreme reaction, but you're going to be kind of on their level a little bit. Like if a patient is angry, you're allowed to then be like, it's okay to be angry. And if they're cussing, again, you don't have to then just have a cussing storm, but you can maybe throw in one, yeah, this is shitty, and then move on. Like that's what I mean by mirroring. It doesn't have to be the exact same thing, but show them that you're a human being too, that there is this connection that they can make with you. And this quote that I'm about to butcher, but I absolutely love, it was a survivor saying, I don't need to see like my terror reflected in the person that I'm talking to. What I need to see is like an anchor. And so again, I think showing up a little bit kind of where they are, but not all the way to where they are, can make a huge difference. I know you guys have something at 6:30, so please leave as you need to. I will try to be quick with these next few slides. I've already hinted this a little bit. Trauma-informed, I didn't adjust this slide apparently. Trauma-informed teaching /care/medical professional stuff also means prioritizing your own health and well-being, because if we're not taking care of ourselves, it becomes that much harder to continue taking care of others. And it can start pushing us into realms where we're no longer doing ethical work, where we're no longer doing and bringing our best versions of ourselves and providing the care that we all showed up today and want to do in the first place. What I love about this picture on this slide is that I think oftentimes, especially when we're super passionate people and we believe in what we're doing, when we actually start taking a break is when the gas tank is on empty and maybe a few more idiot lights, as my mom would call them, are on. So maybe the check engine light is on, all those other awful lights are on, you lost a tire. And so you're like, okay, maybe now I'll take a break. Maybe now I'll actually start talking to somebody about what I'm going through. I challenge you all to start recognizing your own signs of stress and overwhelm so that you can start taking a break when you're more about halfway, because that's more sustainable. That's going to cause less damage to your own mind and body, and is coming from somebody who went to empty, went to the car blowing up, and then finally decided to address my trauma exposure. I highly recommend that you all don't get to that point, because it makes it so much harder to work through and overcome. You do get to the other end. I just would highly encourage you all not to get to that point. And I also understand if I were in your guys' shoes and somebody in this position was talking to me, I'd be like, okay, I hear you, but I don't know if that's me though. I want to acknowledge that I understand sometimes we have to live it a little bit to then build a practice and then understand that it is important to prioritize ourselves. I personally had to learn the hard way. I hope that maybe a handful of you don't have to learn the hard way. This will be the last big content piece for you all. I want you all to know that moving forward and dealing with trauma exposure and dealing with your own trauma, these are like the 4 big puzzle pieces. We've already talked about connection. And so that's a huge piece for all of us. Trauma happens to the body. The body is responding to trauma. The body's experiencing the trauma literally and internally with all of our stress hormones and all the physical responses that go on. So moving our body, reconnecting with our body is going to be so important, because there's some internal, innate ways that our body knows how to work through stress. A lot of times this part of our brain gets in the way of us accessing those innate ways of healing. And so I just encourage you in movement, in whatever that means. It doesn't mean you have to start running ultra marathons and now you have to work out 7 days a week. But if it literally just means, you know what, I'm going to take the long way to my next meeting and walk that way, awesome. Because all of this, I'm a huge fan of this idea of micro moments, and it's just taking advantage of the time you have, whether that's 1 second between presentations or 1 second, 5 seconds between meetings. Take advantage of those, because if you do that enough, it's like drops in the bucket. If you can just build a practice around taking care of your body, then it's going to help sustain you through some of the hardest times that you have to work through. And no matter what, no matter all the things we don't have control of in life, at any given moment, we can all be in connection and control of our breath. Deep breathing is known as a natural way for our body to start working through stress and get to a calmer space. I can't tell you how many times I have deep breathed today and yesterday, because life's a little crazy right now, but that's all I had. I was like, I don't have time to go run like I usually do. I was like, but what I can do right now at 12:05 p.m. in the middle of all this chaos is breathe. And then mindfulness is just being aware, starting to recognize and not judging yourself for being stressed out or overwhelmed, but just start to notice it. Ian, were you going to add anything? I just saw that you unmuted yourself.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I was just gonna say, so much of self-care is just about consistency and showing up. We just recently in one of our meetings talked about how self-care and self-soothing are different, and self-soothe both have their place, but self-care, a lot of what makes it self-care is consistency and habits, and making sure that you're doing things for yourself on a consistent basis and not just when the alarm bells are screaming.
Yeah, thank you.
Just build those habits.
All of this, we shouldn't just be taking care of ourselves when life is awful. We should also be taking care of ourselves when moments are great. Just have a practice. It's you know what, this feels good for me, and just practice, because it'll actually make utilizing those habits during stressful times that much easier if we've already been practicing them during low stress moments and times like that. As promised, that was my last content slide. So this is my direct contact information. If you guys would ever like to reach out, I took a list of all the things that I said I would get to Emma. It is still pretty chaotic here. I will get this to Emma. She will get those to you. Just give me a little bit of time to work on that. But I will get all that information. You guys have been absolutely amazing. I've really appreciated your guys' insight and everything you've contributed, and especially your guys' engagement. So I hope you have a lovely Wednesday. I almost said Friday. I am out of it all right now. So thank you all so much. You guys have been awesome.
And thanks, Maddie. Thanks, Ian, for being here. We really appreciate your time and all of your knowledge and everything that you shared with us. So for everyone else still on the call, I put in the chat if you're interested in learning about the National Health Service Corps and Nurse Corps loan payment programs. They're literally just getting started on the other Zoom, so you haven't missed a thing yet. So perfect timing, Maddie and Ian. But otherwise, I will make sure to log your hours for you. So again, thanks for being here, and we will make sure you get all of the information mentioned in this webinar. So thanks, everyone. Oh, Maddie, you're muted if you were trying to talk to me.
Oh, I was talking to myself.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you guys so much. I'm sorry I was a little absent right at the beginning. We had a Zoom link mix up that was not a big deal at all. So everyone had the right link except for me, which is why I was in the wrong link. So totally fine. So I apologize for not being a little bit more engaged at the beginning, but I really appreciate you guys being here.
No worries. I didn't think that at all. So you are just
I was
fine.
like, I had a frantic look on my face. I was like, did we send out the wrong Zoom link to like half the group? Nope. I just hopped on what I thought was the link we use every time, and I was the only one there. So, so it's all good. And then, do you guys need anything from me? Any questions or anything?
No, not at this time. Thank you guys so much for inviting us in. This was amazing.
Yeah, and the students loved it. Lots of good feedback. So really appreciate it.
Sweet. Well, cool. I hope you have a lovely evening, and I guess I can stop sharing now.
You know, that's okay. Thank you guys.
Yeah. Bye. Thanks, Ian.
Yeah, of course.